I'm getting ready to introduce Dorie Clark, our featured speaker. I saw her speak at a conference in Arizona a few months ago, and it was extremely interesting. And her expertise is talking about how we represent ourselves to others in our professional lives and really in all of our lives. She's an author of an acclaimed book, Reinventing You. And I found it very interesting reading. I would highly recommend it. She's working on another book that's coming out in the spring. I'm sure she'll tell you about that. She's a fine speaker. I learned a lot just by watching her speak. And so at this time, it's a pleasure to invite Dorie Clark as our featured speaker for EduSoCal. Dorie?
Thank you so much, Michael. Well, hi everyone. I'm really glad to be here with you today. And I wanted to start out because the theme of today's conference is reinvention. And so one of the places that I think makes sense in a lot of ways for us to start is by thinking about how we reinvent ourselves. During the course of writing my book, Reinventing You, I profiled dozens and dozens of professionals who had in some way, large or small, reinvented themselves. But one of the most interesting conversations that I had was with a gentleman named Stephen Rice, who's an executive vice president of human resources at Juniper Networks, which some of you guys probably do business with. When I spoke with him, he said that one of the questions that he always asks when he's interviewing people for really high-level jobs at Juniper is, how are you reinventing yourself? Because he really believes that the fundamental skill moving forward, the baseline skill that we need in the workplace, is the ability to adapt, the ability to be flexible. And if we have that, we can learn almost anything else that we need to do. So reinvention, I would argue, is becoming more and more essential to all of us. But one of the issues that comes with reinvention is how it affects our personal brand. Because you can be reinventing all you want, but what happens if your reputation stays the same or it's not matching where you are? So just to take a brief step back, this is actually a cover story from 1997 from Fast Company magazine. Tom Peters, the famed management guru from the 80s, did this cover story called The Brand Called You, which really kind of began the sort of popular use of the terminology personal brand. And so since then, people have been talking about it a lot. But, and some people, I give these talks often, some people kind of recoil a little bit even at the phrase. They say, oh, personal brand. I don't want one of those. Why do I have to do that? Why do I have to sell myself? But I wanted to make clear up front that I'm certainly not talking about some kind of fakeness or selling yourself under false pretenses. When I'm talking about personal brand, really what it is a synonym for your reputation. And as professionals, I hope that we all care about our reputation. I mean, ultimately, that's the ultimate currency. But there have been changes in the past 10 to 20 years in the workplace that I think people talk about a lot, people fret about them a lot, but it can be hard to piece out what to do about them. One is the fact that the nature of our reputation has really changed over the past, say, 15-ish years since the internet really commonly pervaded our lives. It used to be that your reputation was how the people who knew you in person thought of you. And so, a lot of it boiled down to what they like to call in management parlance executive presence. How well do you communicate? Do you dress like a professional? Your gravitas. Are you a serious person? All these things. Are you a leader? People would pick up on that based on how you dealt with them. And that's important. That still exists. That's still a big part of your personal brand. But it's not the only part of your personal brand now. As you guys, as CIOs and technology professionals, probably know better than anyone, our reputations now are actually running on two parallel tracks. There's still the one that we need to be concerned about what do our peers and the people who know us think about us, but there's also our online reputations. And it would be easy, right, if the only thing about us online was LinkedIn. Perfectly controlled environments. We can put up our nice, snappy, professional picture of ourselves. We can create our own narrative describing us. It's pretty mild in a lot of ways. If this was our online reputation, great, no problem. But of course, as you guys know better than anyone, the internet is a little bit unwieldy. And when it comes to our online reputation, which, I mean, the minute you meet someone, the minute anyone is interested in doing business with you in any fashion, the first thing they're doing is Googling you. It means that we have to think about all of the pieces of our online reputation, not just LinkedIn. What's the totality? What are all these random things coming together? And so, I just FYI, I'm not being narcissistic. I just thought I wouldn't violate somebody else's privacy by putting all their social accounts up there. I figured, Harry, you could see mine. But anyway, so it's kind of a conundrum because there's so many social channels. You guys are probably personally involved in a ton. I mean, everybody's on Facebook, right? Except for the random few who opt out. You've got Instagram, Twitter, depending on your predilections. You've got Pinterest and Vine, and Instagram videos, and maybe there's niche social networks you're part of. Maybe some people are still on Foursquare. Who knows? But there's a whole variety of things. How do we combine them and create a cohesive identity for ourselves that is real, but is also hopefully professional, hopefully what we want it to be? And where this really comes to matter is in terms of the impact. I mean, this is a high stakes question for us because I used to work in politics, and in the 2004 election cycle, I was the New Hampshire communications director for Howard Dean, who some of you guys may have followed, particularly because his campaign at the time was recognized as being particularly technologically innovative. But even then, this was a pre-Facebook world, a pre-YouTube world that we were dealing with just a decade ago. And so what we used to always tell our interns, we were constantly concerned with controlling the message, which now every campaign in business has had to kind of reckon with the fact that you can't. But we tried, and we would lecture all of our interns really sternly that anything you do can you have to think if it ends up on the front page of the New York Times, how will it impact our campaign? And so all of these sort of stupid teenage mishigas. We were constantly worried about interns who would go drinking or something, and then it would be reported on in the newspaper. That would be bad enough. But now, the word spreads even more. The threshold is even lower. We actually, on the Dean campaign, we had an intern named Melanie who, had been subjected to many of these lectures. And it was exciting times. It was the day that Howard Dean officially announced his candidacy. And so, we all thought it had been a really good day. And so we turn on ABC News, World News Tonight, to watch the campaign, the presentation of the campaign launch. And on World News Tonight, we see Melanie being interviewed. So, every once in a while you get these national bursts, but now a Facebook post, as you know, can become national news. It doesn't have to be something as overtly stupid as disobeying orders and talking to Peter Jennings. So some people, clearly I had to put this slide in. This is from a website, FYI, if you need more of this in your life. I clearly do. It's called The Cutest Paw. You really can't beat it. But some people, as a result of all this, balancing these online identities, start trying to find ways to hide themselves. I know many of you guys working in universities, there's a lot of complicated issues, related to students and privacy and people friending you on Facebook and who should you say yes to and how do you combine these realms of your life. And so I have a friend who, while not literally doing this, in some ways metaphorically is, she's a university professor, and she has her, her regular Facebook account with her regular name, and her students friend her all the time, and she felt weird saying no to them, so she created this account, which is kind of this totally neutral public account, and then she has a private one under a nickname, which, I mean, to me seems like way too much work. She doesn't even put anything that secret on it, but she felt weird enough about the boundaries, the public and private boundaries, that she created these two separate accounts. So I mean, that's one possibility. That's one way that people navigate it. But we have so many different channels, and the nature of the channels. This is my Hootsuite account here. So from that, I'm doing Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. With all of these different social channels, there's different things that you talk about. There's different ways that you behave. So for me, one way that I strike the balance personally, I get asked a lot of questions about, well, how much personal stuff do you interject and how do you do it? Everybody's answer is different, but the way that I think about it is that for Twitter, to a certain extent, you almost have a brand promise in your Twitter account, which is, what do people come there for? And if what you do is, kind of random musings about life, that's great. That's what people sign on for, and maybe they really like your perspective. For me, I tweet pretty heavily about branding and marketing and things like that. And so if all of a sudden I started sharing all of this personal content, there's actually a reasonable chance based on people's expectations in the past that it might alienate them in some way. So I usually suggest to folks that if you have a Twitter account, do maybe 80-ish, 80 or 90% of the thing that is your brand promise, whether it's marketing or technology or tennis or whatever it is. And then maybe 10 to 15% you can interject your voice, your personal pursuits, so that people really begin to feel like they know you. That's one way of doing it. For Facebook, I think of it differently. That's the place for me where I'll put up fun photos. These are actually photos from my account. They all, to a certain extent, serve a professional purpose. And there's nothing I ever post online that I would be horrified if it got out to the wider public. But some I'll show to regular people and like the public, and some I'll just show to friends. This is a maple syrup house that I visited in Western Mass when I gave a lecture at Williams College, and those are fire breathers, fire eaters that I saw in Singapore. And so they're fun, they're kind of personal things that I did. They also were things that were pictures taken on business trips. So to a certain extent, it reinforces the branding about, it gives me an opportunity to talk about the lecture or the things that I'm doing in Singapore or at Williams College. But they're kind of a fun slice of life. But people come to different channels looking for different things. So I think one of the things we need to do for all of the channels that we choose to be involved in is to say, well, what's our goal for the channel? And of the people that we're connected to and who are receiving our information, what do they really want? Do they want, like for instance on Twitter, links to interesting marketing articles? Or on Facebook, are they looking for a more personal slice and a more personal connection? So they might like photos like this. I think one of the biggest questions that we get a lot when it comes to social media is, who do you let in? Who do you friend? I actually gave a talk last week in Kansas City, and there was a woman that I met there who's a pretty prolific blogger and social media person, and she actually sent me a message. She sent me a question yesterday, and she said, why don't you have a LinkedIn button on your website, so that people can connect with you on LinkedIn? Because clearly she viewed that as a big omission. I had all these other ones. Why didn't I have that? But in my case, it was deliberate, because LinkedIn is a reciprocal relationship. Unlike Twitter, where someone can follow you, or even on Facebook now, where you don't have to be friends with somebody. Somebody can sign up, even with a personal page, not just a fan page, to follow you. For LinkedIn, you have to accept them, and it's kind of this equal thing. And so I actually don't want just anybody to be a LinkedIn connection. So it's kind of thinking through what are your characteristics. Some people, of course, they call themselves lions, LinkedIn open networkers. They'll connect with anybody. They have like 25,000 connections, which maybe that's good. I'm not sure. It's not my philosophy. However, I try to limit that, and then when I'm driving people toward connections, I'll say, well, let's connect on Twitter or something like that. That's a better way to do it. But everybody has their own comfort zone about how you think about the way that you use your channels. And I'll say too, because I already know you're cool people because you're friends with Michael and Krista, that if you want to friend me on LinkedIn, you go right ahead. But so I wanted to share in this talk, and I'm really eager to hear your thoughts and ideas about this. 4 principles, 4 ways that I think about, and in my writing for Forbes and Harvard Business Review and things like that. I've talked to a lot of people and done a lot of interviews in the social realm, and I'd be very interested to hear how you guys think about it. But these are some of the ways that I've begun to think about branding in the digital era and how it's changed. So this is a shout out. I don't know if he's in the room here, but where is Mikhail here? He's probably coming eventually. We were having dinner last night. Oh, there he is. Yes, this one's for you, Mikhail. So Mikhail's from Baruch College, and he actually brought this woman in as a speaker to one of his events. But this is Dana Boyd. Some of you may know her or have heard of her. She had a book that came out earlier this year called It's Complicated, which is a very good title because the subject is the online social lives of teenagers. And she's studied this for years. She did her doctoral dissertation on the subject. She's now a researcher for Microsoft on the topic. But what I find most interesting about her actually is her personal experience, because the way that she got into this was, she's in her, I think, mid-30s now, but so when she was a teenager, she was an early adopter of blogging, or as the cool kids called it then, live journaling. So she was a big live journaler, and she would write all kinds of great teenage things in the early to mid to late 1990s. She'd write about her love life. She'd write about bands that she liked, all kinds of stuff. And so she grows up. She gets her doctorate at Berkeley. She goes to work for Microsoft. She starts teaching at NYU. A logical thing to do, one might think, would be to take the juvenilia down. She has the ability to do it. It's her stuff. It's, sometimes you hear about, there's all this stuff about me online and it's so stressful. Well, this is stuff that she could choose to take down at any moment. And she actually has explicitly said, I'm not taking it down. She says, I refuse to be embarrassed about what I have written in the past. And I thought that was fascinating, because her perspective is that if somebody wants to judge her about something that she wrote when she was 17 years old, they're welcome to, but it's their mistake, because she has provided years and years of context for other people to be able to really understand who she is, where she's coming from, and today what she has to offer. And she wasn't writing anything crazily inflammatory as a teenager, but there's plenty of stuff that you can imagine as a teen you might be embarrassed by. But she says, no, let it stand. The fact that she lets it stand is her flag in the soil for people being able to feel more comfortable sharing themselves online, so that we don't constantly feel a need to have to mop up after ourselves. It's the vision that, because over time she's created so much content, people will find what they're looking for. If they're looking for bad stuff, sure, they'll find it. But if they're looking to get to know her, they'll also be able to judge her based on the totality of what she's created. So, principle 1, the way that I think about it, is that when we talk about transparency, it's a buzzword, right? Everybody's using it. But that's, to me, what transparency means, that we have to step up, we have to share more, and we have to sometimes refuse to be embarrassed in order to feel free to do it. Principle number 2, relationships equal trust. So, as I mentioned, during the 2004 campaign, I was working in politics at the time, but in the prior cycle, in 2000, I was a political journalist. I had actually started my career as a journalist, so I followed the election very closely. And one of the phenomena that was most interesting to me at the time, maybe some of you guys, if you enjoy politics, were following it as well, was the McCain campaign. Now, some of you, if you haven't followed it that closely, or if you're younger, may not necessarily remember, but the John McCain of 2000 was a radically different candidate than the John McCain of 2008. The John McCain of 2008 had sort of branded himself as the establishment candidate, and it was successful enough in terms of getting him the party's nomination. in 2000, he took a very different tack, which did not get him the nomination, but won him the incredible admiration of the press corps. He was the media darling of the 2000 election. And there's a reason why. So this bus here that you see, this was his campaign bus, the Straight Talk Express. And on the Straight Talk Express, he knew that George W. Bush had all the money behind him. He had all the establishment behind him. He had to play a different card. If he was going to be successful at all, he had to try something really different than the establishment. He had to be, take the challenger position. And so he said, all right, I'm not going to have all the money. I'm not going to have all the endorsements. I need to get as much earned media, as much free press as I possibly can. And so whereas the establishment candidates, Bush and Gore, really made a very pronounced point of shunning the media. They would have limited media availabilities. They'd only talk to them maybe once a day. They'd keep the media at bay. John McCain took the entire opposite approach. And he would let reporters ride with him on the Straight Talk Express. And for hours, they would just shoot the breeze. And the journalists got so much access, it was unbelievable. Now, you might think, because the relationship is often very adversarial between political candidates and journalists, this could potentially be a really bad idea, right? I mean, just like somebody could use Dana Boyd's youthful musings against her, if John McCain fumbled, if he said something wrong, if he was a little too off the cuff, maybe he just hadn't got enough sleep that night, says something wrong, it could become a disaster for the campaign if the journalists see it and pick up on it. It's risky. It's a risky move. But it turned out that that actually was not what happened. What happened on the Straight Talk Express was the reporters really got to know him. They built a relationship with John McCain. And whereas all the people covering Bush and Gore, because they'd see him for 10 minutes a day at this roped-off media availability, if Bush or Gore screwed up and they said something wrong during those 10 minutes, the reporters would pounce on it, because it was literally all they had. Whereas with McCain, the reporters had an infinity of options. They could write any story they wanted because they could talk to him anytime about anything. And so when he did make a mistake, when he would say 600 million instead of 600 billion or whatever it is, they wouldn't pounce on it. Oh, that's an error. They'd say, oh, well, he's said that same thing 100 times and he just misspoke this time. They understood and they trusted him because he had built a context of a relationship. And so when we talk about the value of content creation, really what we're talking about is building a relationship with readers, with the public, with the world that's Googling you. If you give people enough information about you, whether it's in person or by sharing your ideas and your thoughts online, it enables them to see who you are, to see what you're capable of, and to forgive mistakes, which is pretty important in today's era. So we're talking all around this. How do you do it specifically? Principle number 3, give them context. This is actually a post that I wrote about a year and a half ago for the Harvard Business Review called If You're Serious About Ideas, Get Serious About Blogging. And for me, this is kind of the distillation of my philosophy in a lot of ways. Blogging is not super sexy anymore. Blogging was really sexy in 2003, 2004. The Dean campaign was, probably historically what it will go down as in terms of its import is it was the first campaign that ever had a blog. That was, pretty significant at the time. But, now who needs a blog, right? We've got pictures, we've got Instagram, we've got videos. We have, deep broadband capability that enables us to do all the cool stuff that, maybe we would have done 10 years ago, but we didn't have the ability. So instead we use text, right? Well, actually, I want to fight back in defense of the blog because as professionals, as knowledge workers, it is actually, if you think about it, really hard for anyone to know if we are any good at what we do. The people around us know. I mean, sure, your colleagues can pick up on it, but if someone is meeting you or evaluating you from afar, it's almost impossible. Are you good at IT? Are you good at technology strategy? Are you good at project management? Who knows? But one of the ways that people can begin to know, that they can begin to get a sense of who you are and how you think is by writing blogs, by sharing things. And there's a lot of exciting opportunities now too. I mean, I was just talking with somebody this morning who was telling me, and I've heard this a million times because it's true, which is that it is very hard. People start blogs and then you can't keep up. If you have your own blog and you have to do it every week or whatever, I mean, it gets to be really taxing with the rest of your real life. So how do you do it? How do you even make time for something like this? Well, I feel like one of the really great innovations actually of late is the fact that LinkedIn, speaking of LinkedIn, has enabled regular people to start blogging for it. It used to be they just had the LinkedIn influencers program, which started a couple of years ago for the sort of media celebrities and business celebrities like Richard Branson. But now they're rolling out the capability so that anyone can blog on their LinkedIn profile. So if you do it, number one, it strengthens your LinkedIn profile because it's all there and, oh, look, I'm checking you out and I can see the stuff that you've written. But they actually have a fair reach on their own. So it doesn't mean that you've created this thing and now everybody's expecting it every week. But when you do post it, it actually has the ability to get a decent readership. So I think that's a kind of exciting development. But there's a lot of ways. I mean, the format is not what matters, really. It's about finding ways to share your perspective and your ideas. That is the unique contribution we can make. And when it comes to sharing your perspective, this slide also goes out to Mikhail. I promise I made these before our dinner. Mikhail, who I was dining with last night, was a customer of this gentleman's store. Some of you may be familiar with him, Gary Vaynerchuk. He is an entrepreneur, and the way that he got his start was that his family owned a liquor store in New Jersey. This is not necessarily something you would think of as the most auspicious launch pad for social media and business success, but nonetheless, he was able to do it because his family came to him and said, well, Gary, you're young. We want to sell wine on the internet. Will you help us figure out how? And so the logical thing at the time when he was looking into it was to start a blog. But Gary was not a writer. He hated writing. He said he's bad at writing. What do you do? And so he decided to share himself in another way. He created a daily video blog called Wine Library TV, which some of you guys may have watched it. At its peak, it had 100,000 daily viewers, and he was able to parlay that into mainstream success. He was visiting, all the talk shows, all the late night shows. He became the social media guy. And I was sharing this story a couple of weeks ago with a group that I was speaking to in Boston. It was a conference about writers, and I was talking with them about how to do marketing and sharing Gary Vaynerchuk's story. And someone said, like, wait a minute. So he made this blog about wine, and like 100,000 people watched it. Like, how is that possible? And so I want to clarify. It's not just that he made a video blog about wine. That's nice. Lots of people like wine. But what really made it so compelling was that you could almost call it counter-programming. We have a theory about what a video blog reviewing wines is going to be like, right? It's going to be stuffy. It's going to be kind of pretentious. It's going to be about all expensive wines. And Gary Vaynerchuk had such a distinct worldview, such a distinct viewpoint that he was wearing casual clothes. He'd invite his buddies on. They'd do expensive wines. They'd do cheap wines. Sometimes they'd do wines and they'd spit it out and say, "This is really crap. You should not buy this." And it was unusual enough that people said, "I like that voice." It's about, when we talk about authenticity, that's another thing that, like transparency, it's become this sort of modern age buzzword. Oh yes, it's be authentic. As long as you give people that advice, everyone's going to nod sagely and say, "Oh yes, that's very wise." But it's more than just a buzzword. It's about, why do people pay attention? Why should they pay attention? We're not looking for the same thing. What the internet era allows us to do with our brand is to show the world something else, to show the world what's unique about us. So the vehicle doesn't matter. If you're not a writer, fine, no problem. do videos, do podcasts. You can do anything with your smartphone, as you guys know better than anyone. But what's really important is your voice. And that leads me to my final kind of arc, my final point, which is about authenticity. How do we stay authentic if we're communicating with all kinds of different audiences across all kinds of different channels? How does that actually work? Some people have a view that authenticity means, so it's like, you can call it an aggressive authenticity. If I'm my authentic self, I should be able to wear whatever I want. And I should be able to, if I want to go meet with investment bankers, I should wear a hoodie. And that's one version of authenticity. But a point that I want to make is that authenticity doesn't have to mean a kind of least common denominator. It doesn't have to mean, well, you're gonna take me or else. Authenticity can also mean reaching for our best selves. I don't necessarily think that it's selling out to wear a nice shirt and a jacket if you're meeting with people who are going to give you money. I don't think it's necessarily a problem for you to dress up for a job interview. Or even, on social media, I think that, we hear sometimes there's studies about how people actually get depressed reading their friends' Facebook pages because everybody says all the good stuff. And, I think we have to get the perspective on it. I mean, I think it's good to share the good stuff. I also think sometimes, it gets a little freaky if it's all like this sort of nihilistic kind of stream. But what's the balance? I think being real doesn't mean wearing a hoodie all the time. I mean, we all like to wear hoodies and sweatsuits, but not all the time. And things are great. We like, we're Americans. We're an optimistic people. People say, how are you doing? You say, great, and things are great sometimes. And we should share those things. But authenticity doesn't mean that you have to be one or you have to be the other. It's not fake if you're not wearing the proverbial social media hoodie all the time. What authenticity really is when you're sad, you can say you're sad. And when things are great, you can say they're great. And because you've provided the context, people will come to understand it. Sometimes authenticity is about striving to be your best self. So in terms of a local icon here, maybe some of you guys recognize him. He is your neighbor in Santa Monica, Warren Bennis. He is one of the great management thinkers of the last century. He's really acclaimed writer and author on leadership. And he wrote an interesting autobiography that I read a couple of years ago. And one of the stories that he told was about when he was a young man and he fought in World War II. And he said that for him, he had just been this kind of, small town guy. He felt like his life wasn't really together very well. And then he was called up and needed to serve in the Army. And he said that it was actually a transformative experience for him because when he put on the uniform, he realized he had to be something better than he was. The uniform called him to his best self. And I wouldn't say it's inauthentic. I would say it's about finding a way to summon that best self. And sometimes through peers, through social media, we can actually get the support we need to do it. When I was writing my book, Reinventing You, I interviewed a woman who's an executive coach. And today she's 20 years into her business, very successful. But she told me about when she first started. And she got started early. She was 27 years old. And she had been laid off, or not laid off, but her startup was moving. And they said, well, you can move with us or else you're not with us. And she didn't want to move, so she said, okay, I'm gonna start my own business. And she'd wanted to be an executive coach. But of course, right, you get a lot of senior executives, they do not necessarily want to be taking advice from a 27-year-old. What does a 27-year-old know about their business? What does a 27-year-old know about their life? And so she was kind of shy. She was kind of nervous at first. She told me that it actually took her 2 years to send out the blast email to her friends announcing her business, because a part of her was so worried about what people would think, or if somebody would write back with some snide comment. But she said that what really helped her was that she had a conversation with a friend of hers, peer of hers, who was a doctor. And the woman said, it was the same thing. You're a medical student, and you're always, looking for permission from other people. You're just practicing. Nobody really takes you that seriously. And all of a sudden, you step across the threshold, and they say, "Hello, doctor." And now you're a doctor. You're not really that much different than you were 2 minutes ago, but your status is different. People treat you differently, and you have to learn how to inhabit that status. That's a kind of authenticity. It's hard to struggle with that sometimes if we don't necessarily even fully believe we're that thing. But it doesn't mean it's not real. It's the thing we're working toward. And so some of you may have seen this. This is a very famous TED Talk done by Amy Cuddy, who is a professor at Harvard Business School. And her talk and the subject of her research is about body language and how body language affects our leadership and about our self-conception. And so one of the things that she shared in her talk was the fact that, it's an interesting sort of technique for you guys. It's worth a look. Apparently, if you strike power poses, this is one of them. You want to have these sort of grand, open postures. If you do that, it actually changes your hormones. Your testosterone goes up, at least temporarily. Don't worry, ladies. And your cortisone, your stress levels go down. So what she suggests, this is the tip of the day. What Amy Cuddy suggests is that before a big presentation or an interview or something like that where it's kind of high stakes, you go into the bathroom and you hide for like 2 minutes beforehand, and you do the power pose, and then you come out and you're like totally pumped. So it's good stuff. But what she talked about, and I think it's the best formulation that I've heard, is that it's not faking it till you make it, it's faking it until you become it. Just like Warren Bennis putting on his soldier's uniform, or just like the new doctor who learns to be confident when speaking with patients so that they will have confidence in her. I think it's not about deceiving others, it's about finding ways to become our best selves. And so, where does this leave us? What do we do with it? When I think about social media and how we use social media today to network, to connect with friends, to share ourselves with other people, authenticity, transparency, these are important values. But what I think it really comes down to is a willingness to be honest, both about the good things and the bad things. There's a blogger named James Altucher, that's this guy, who I've been reading a lot of lately, who I really think does interesting work. And one of the things that has really distinguished him in the marketplace, is that he writes very frankly about failure. I think failure, in a lot of ways, is the last taboo in our society. Nobody wants to hear about it. Everybody, it's nice if you have a Horatio Alger story about, I grew up poor, but now I'm fantastically successful. Or I had a setback once, but ever since then it's been fantastic. We hear that all the time. But James Altucher blogs very openly about all the mistakes that he's made. He founded companies and sold them for millions of dollars, and then he blew it, and he lost all his money and went bankrupt, and then he started another company, and then he lost all that money. Up and down and up and down. He's divorced. He talks about all these things. And I think that really the best gift that we can give when it comes to helping others understand how we see the world and how we can contribute. If we think about this from a professional standpoint, what's the win-win, right? Some people think about personal branding as just this kind of narcissistic exercise about, let me tell you how great I am. But really, when done right, it is about digging deep. Personal branding doesn't work if we don't understand who we are at our core. It just doesn't work. The first step in personal branding is understanding who we are and then sharing with the world how we can contribute. And if other people begin to really get that, it creates a virtuous circle because it means they know what we can do and that we're open to opportunities, and those opportunities start coming to us. So for me, the power of reinvention, of personal branding, is that if we do create content, whether it could be blogging, it could be a Twitter feed, it could even be these old-fashioned real-world activities like organizing a conference and bringing people together. But the more ways you show people what you care about and what value you can bring, the more good opportunities start to come to you. That's the power of branding in the digital age. And I'm glad to be here, and I look forward to the conversation with Mike and all your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Dorie. Just 1 second here. I want to get ready.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I feel better. I'm very fast. So, well, thank you so much. Thanks for your comments. Thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you, we've heard your thoughts on this, and you go around talking to a lot of people about their personal brand. How did you come to find your own personal brand?
In a lot of ways, my own personal brand was accidental, you could say. There is really interesting research by a guy named David Galenson, who is a friend of mine and an economist at the University of Chicago, which it kind of has its own connotations, right? The Chicago School of Economics is known as this very kind of hardcore supply side place. But David Galenson does really different research. And what he focuses on actually is creativity and the arc of creativity over someone's lifetime. And so specifically, he'll look at Picasso, say, versus Cézanne. Picasso is somebody who, from the very beginning in their creativity, emerged almost fully formed. He knew from the beginning what he wanted to do, and he went out and did it. Whereas for Cézanne, it took him a long time. It was kind of an iterative process of figuring it out. And not to compare myself to Cézanne, but I will say that for me, I had a lot of ideas about things that I was interested in. I was interested in media. I was interested in politics. I was interested in branding and marketing and technology, all these kinds of things. But I didn't know how to make a contribution. And also, my own excuse as well is that it was kind of a tumultuous time to figure out how to make a contribution because things were changing in those realms pretty fast. But I would say that I felt my way from one thing to another. And in terms of writing this book, for instance, Reinventing You, which it's about personal brand, reinvention, those are important topics and they're things that I've swirled around for a long time. But the way that it really happened was that when I started blogging for Harvard Business Review in 2010, the second post I ever wrote was called How to Reinvent Your Personal Brand. It was kind of right in line with this. And they liked the post enough that they asked me to turn it into a magazine piece. And then from the magazine piece, it became a book proposal. So it really kind of emerged organically.
Great. What would you say your personal brand is?
What I would like to say, there's actually an exercise that I'll suggest to some of you guys if you're interested in getting a little sense of it. And it's something I talk about in the book. If you're looking for kind of a quickie version of what is my personal brand, take like half a dozen of your friends and colleagues and just really quick, almost like a parlor game, say, if you only had 3 words to be able to describe me, what would they be? And it's pretty effective because by the time you get to the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th person, they're probably going to be using pretty similar words. You're going to start to see some real commonalities. And so you can begin to understand what is coming through clearest about you. But in terms of me, in terms of my personal brand, I mean, I'd probably say fun, and I hear that a lot. People often think if you're doing business writing and things like that, you have to be really serious. And so I kind of try to make it more interesting. So maybe fun and smart and innovative.
Well, we'll ask later. We'll see how that matches up.
I need to do the survey.
You know, I was thinking as you were talking about the idea of examining your own brand and understanding who you are. It's intimidating for a lot of people. And so even though some people in the room might be thinking, you know, I'd like to understand better who I am and how I present myself, but I'm not sure I really want to know. I'm not sure I want to ask my friends what they think of me. How do you help people get over that initial hesitancy of, you know, maybe just muddling along the way I'm now is good enough without having to know all the details of how people really do think about me, because maybe I won't be comfortable with what they have to say.
Yeah. It's an important question. And so one caveat that I'll give you guys, and this actually may be comforting to some of you guys, if you do this exercise, if you ask your friends, they will only tell you positive things. I mean, unless you have like some really sociopathic friend, they're all going to tell you nice things. And so this is both good and bad, right? I mean, it's good because you're not going to hear some horrible thing that's going to leave you crying in the bathroom. The bad is that sometimes we really want this like honest feedback. And so there's different ways that you can get it. I mean, one common way, if you have access to this through your company, is to hire an executive coach who actually does a sort of anonymous version of this surveying. But what I will say to you, if you are somebody who's interested in digging just a little bit deeper, because I mean, it's nice to know your strengths, it's great, helpful, but it's also useful to kind of know where your weaknesses are. What I would suggest to you, you get this list of positive words from your friends, and the next exercise that you do on your own is you say, what is the converse of this word? And is it possible that this is a problem for me? And not all of it's going to be a problem, but you have to be open to the possibility that it is. So I mean, if somebody says, oh, you're charismatic and visionary, that is a marvelous thing to be. But if you say, does that mean that I'm not detail-oriented enough? You got to just kind of sit with that a little bit, and you can find the negative within the positive.
That's great. I want to say, as I'm talking, if any of you have questions, just go ahead and step up to the microphone, and then I'll call on people. We are recording this, and it'll be up on YouTube later. So if you have a question, do go ahead and step up, and that way I'll know you have a question, and I can call on you. Are there cultural differences in how people perceive this? So, you know, we live in Los Angeles in a very diverse culture with people from all over the world. Do people perceive the idea of creating a personal brand very differently in different cultures, do you think?
Yeah, it is very different across cultures. And in fact, it's something that I've written about quite a bit because I was traveling this year in Asia and in Europe. And so for any of you who are interested, I actually did 2 articles for Harvard Business Review recently with my colleague Andy Malinsky from Brandeis. And I did a post for Forbes about personal branding, how it plays out in Asia. But broadly speaking, how it impacts Americans actually are recognized around the world, interestingly enough, as being preeminent in personal branding, by which I mean that other cultures think we're really obnoxious. So, I mean, you know, of course, even within America, there's diversity. Even within America, there's plenty of people that are, you know, a little uncomfortable with it. But broadly speaking, in other countries, it's a lot more toned down than in the United States. So if you're dealing in a cross-cultural context, it's useful to keep that in mind. You know, for instance, one example is that if you're in Asia, a really common thing is, you know, if somebody says to you, that was such a great speech, you did such an amazing job, you should actually say, like, oh, it wasn't that good, I wish I could have done better. Like, that's the polite thing to say. And in America, somebody says that, and it's like, God, their self-esteem sucks. So, you know, just being cognizant of those differences can be useful.
Great, thank you. Jill, did you have a question?
I'm curious about gender roles in putting yourself out there, and especially when maybe part of your identity doesn't necessarily match. I think of new mothers, right? And I'm just curious what your experience is.
Yes, great question. Gender is a big issue when it comes to personal brand. And again, similar to the cross-cultural element, always seems to be the case somehow, but the like archetypal norm in business circles is usually set by the people who dominate business circles, which is usually white professional men. And so what is often expected in an American culture is, if somebody says, well, I'm thinking of promoting you for this job, you're supposed to say, yes, I'm incredibly qualified, I'll do it. And, meanwhile, it's very common, for anybody who's a fan of Lean In or any of the other great books written about gender issues, you get women who are, they want to think about it. They're like, gosh, I don't know. I need to examine myself to see if I'm, qualified for this. I mean, maybe not yet, maybe next year. And, meanwhile, they may well be far more qualified than the guy, but just, have a different way of expressing it or a different level of confidence about it. And so one of the things that I like to stress and talk about in Reinventing You is the fact that when it comes to personal branding, it really is and should be a smorgasbord approach. You should be able to come and take what you want from it, because not every technique is going to feel comfortable for every person. Some people love public speaking, some people hate it. Some people love big networking events where you trade business cards, some people hate that. It's all okay. But the important point is that just because certain elements don't feel comfortable, that's not an excuse to give up on personal branding entirely. Everybody, to be successful, needs, and this is in America, this is in every other culture, everybody needs to do some personal branding. The question is, what kind and in what way does it manifest? So, for instance, if you hate public speaking, but maybe you like to write, that's something I did. One of my most popular posts for Harvard Business Review is called "Personal Branding for Introverts." And so, a good tip for introverts is, look, if you don't want to be the one on the stage, just write something. You can take hours, you can make it perfect, you put it out there. That's a really legitimate way of doing it. Or similarly, if you're not a big crowd kind of person, you should still be doing networking, but maybe it's having one-on-one lunches with people, once a week or something like that, rather than diving into a big melee at a Chamber of Commerce event. But you got to find your own way that feels comfortable. So it's an important question. Thank you.
So, you've dealt with this, I'm sure, in politics. I mean, and it was kind of notorious with Howard Dean, who through a set of circumstances sort of became defined by something that was beyond his control, and the Howard Dean yell, and for those of you who remember that, how do you recover from being identified for something that you don't necessarily want to be part of your personal brand? Perhaps perhaps you made a mistake, perhaps you broke the law, you said something stupid, you made a racist comment, that happens occasionally. Yeah. And maybe that isn't really who you are, but you had a bad day, you just had extremely poor judgment, you did something stupid. How do people recover from those kinds of defining moments? Obviously it takes time, but what can people do to try to adjust their brand in the face of something that they've become defined by, that they really don't want to be defined by, and that they don't really feel is them?
Yeah, it's a really important question in this era in particular. So there's a few thoughts that I have about it. Number one is that for people who've worked in media relations, there's kind of a concept which we call making something a one-day story. And really what your goal is, if something negative has happened, the worst thing you can ever have is for this kind of like Chinese water torture, like, oh, a little bit about the story today, oh, a little more tomorrow, oh, look, there's a new development, so we read about it on day 3. It's like the longer it goes on, the more it embeds in people's memory. So you want to make it a one-day story where even if it's a really bad one-day story, you get it done. So some examples of that, I mean, if you have something really bad that's happened, number one, you want to disclose everything right away. And this is where people, they keep making the same dumb mistake because they think they can hide something. And it's like, no, look, people, you cannot hide it. They're going to subpoena the records or somebody's going to talk or whatever. Just get it out there. Get it all out there on day 1. That's the most important thing. Or if it's just that you've done something stupid, apologize. Apologize rapidly and move on. You all may remember, or you may not, that about a year ago, Reese Witherspoon had this issue where she was driving with her husband, and I don't even remember exactly. There was some level of intoxication involved, and they mouthed off to a policeman. Right? They got pulled over, they mouthed off to a policeman. Reese Witherspoon says, "Do you know who I am?" You know, the famous words. And anyway, so the good news, right? The reason that this does not tarnish Reese Witherspoon's public persona it's technology. But was that she apologized really rapidly. I mean, like literally, even before the day was out, she was like, "I don't know what I was thinking. I made a terrible mistake," and it went away. That's pretty good. So move on quickly, make it a one-day story. Another important thing is that hopefully all of us, if we're doing personal branding right, we're creating the level of context, just like John McCain did, so that when a mistake happens, that's not the only thing they know about us. They know other things, and they can put it in context and say, "Whoa, that's really unlike him. He must be having a bad day." So that helps. Number 3, we were talking earlier about content creation and why it's so important. I mean, it can seem burdensome because it's, how am I going to find the time? But it's a worthwhile investment, even if it's things that are really quick, even if it's sending a tweet a day. That is something that is really valuable because over time it adds up. And content is, we all know that nothing ever goes away on the internet. It's just a question of what comes up first. And so if something bad is out there, you don't want it to be the first thing with your name. You want it to be the 450th thing with your name on it. One example was during the last presidential cycle, NPR actually interviewed me about this question. You may remember that Rick Santorum had what was known as Rick Santorum's Google problem. And I'm hearing a few knowing nods and chuckles. So Rick Santorum had, through his various anti-gay comments, alienated a gay blogger named Dan Savage. Dan Savage decided that he would exact a little bit of friendly revenge on Rick Santorum by creating a website dedicated to promulgating a new definition for the word Santorum, which was an obscene definition. And
you can look it up later.
Yes, I won't say it. You can look it up. And anyway, so Rick Santorum, as he's running for president, of course, this becomes a problem because people are looking him up. This is like literally the number 2 thing that people see on Google is Dan Savage's website about him. And so Rick Santorum, I mean, it shows how much people know about how these things work. He calls Google and says, "Google, will you fix it? Google, will you take it down?" Sadly, no, that's not how Google works. And literally the only thing that you can do, I mean, Dan Savage won fair and square. Dan Savage had 1 million links into his website. He did it the right way in terms of honest white hat search engine optimization. It was a very popular site. And so meanwhile, the only thing that if you're Rick Santorum you can do is you need to create a boatload of content that is considered more relevant and better and more valuable than what Dan Savage has created. If you don't do that, Dan Savage wins, and it's Santorum's fault that he let him.
So the different companies that advertise they can fix your reputation online, I mean, do you know what they're doing? Is it snake oil, or are they actually using these kind of techniques that you're describing?
It's very similar. I mean, oftentimes when they say they'll fix your reputation, it's kind of a combination of, there's certain things that can be taken down. I mean, if your friend posted something about you on Facebook that's like a stupid picture, you can just ask them to take it down, and it's fine. I mean, traces may linger, but you can mostly get things taken care of. Sometimes there's really negative people, evil people that require legal initiatives, and so sometimes you may have to, as a last resort, send a cease and desist notice to them. I mean, that's sometimes what they do. But really, if you're hiring somebody for this, oftentimes they're just doing content creation. They're building different social profiles for you and creating stuff so that will rise in the search engine rankings compared to the other stuff.
Okay, I do want to mention before I ask the next question, if there are any questions, now's a good time to step up because we're getting near the end. So if you do have a question for Dorie, please come up to the microphone. I wanted to ask about, a pretty much all of us in the room are educators one way or another. Some of us are primarily technical people, but we're supporting people who are educators. We also have faculty members in the room, people who work directly with students. And I was interested because the discussion that you're having is a little different from some of the rhetoric that we're hearing about that we should be teaching kids, especially not so much our college students, but the younger students, about being online. That's a kind of cautionary, will be very careful, always be very careful, don't put anything real online because it's going to come back and bite you. And if you post the wrong thing on Facebook in college, because it means you're never going to get a job ever again. And I hear you saying something a little bit more nuanced, and I'm curious if you were advising students about thinking about, as they're beginning to develop their online identity at 14 or 16 and 18, where just like with your Dana Boyd's description, your identity at 30 or 40, 50 is going to be very different. You don't know what that's going to be. What do you think? What do you think our advice and our guidance should be to students as they build their online identities?
Yeah, excellent question. I think the message has gotten through in a lot of ways to students today about the negative things. I mean, I think that if you ask, I mean, that's not to say people are always smart, but if you ask an 18-year-old, should you post a picture of you, drinking from a keg on Facebook? They'll probably recognize, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't do that. That's probably a bad thing. I mean, I think we've been successful in scaring them, which, I mean, that's good to a certain extent, because if you go back 5 years or 10 years, people really didn't grasp the ramifications of it. And, I think that you legitimately had students that were like, oh, people can see this. And, now those illusions are gone. They know about the bad stuff. The part that hasn't been told yet, I think, as effectively, is that in addition to not doing bad stuff, you also should be doing good stuff. You should be creating things. I mean, I get questions sometimes from people, literally even MBA students who I teach, and they'll say, well, I want to create a good personal brand online, but, I don't yet know what I want to specialize in. And so would it be a bad thing? I mean, maybe I shouldn't do anything because I don't know, what my brand is going to be. And so if I come up with something now, it'll be off message or whatever. It's like, oh my God, you're overthinking it, people, because I didn't know what my career was going to be until I was in my late 20s. I had like 10 careers. I was a journalist. I was a political spokesperson. I was a nonprofit executive director. If I had waited to start doing things until I knew precisely what the plan was, I'd probably still be waiting. And so I think odds are, so number one, your interests are probably not going to change 180. There's probably going to be, your interests may change like 45 degrees or maybe even 90 degrees, probably not 180 degrees. There's going to be a realm of things. And so if you think right now, if you're a high school senior, and you really care about social activism, and you think, gosh, maybe I want to start my own nonprofit someday. You know what? Start writing about that. Start sharing about that. That's fine. That's great. Even if you decide later you want to do something different, that is a valuable piece of yourself that is probably not going to disappear. It creates a record of you, a record of how you think. It'll, if nothing else, even just show that you're conversant with the social tools that are so important today. I mean, literally, I think the only thing that we need to really avoid is stuff that everyone knows is stupid. Don't show yourself in compromising positions. Don't trash somebody online. All this stuff. As long as we get that through their skulls, anything that people want to write about, I think it's probably a good thing, even if it's slightly different than where they end up.
Great, thank you. Lorraine, you have a question?
Yes, I was just thinking, my greatest fear is all of this content in the digital era. How are we going to archive this? How are we going to save this? Because a little piece of us are down out there, and looking back historically, we can look at letters and but now it's digital. So what's going to be our future in how we can see ourselves?
Yeah. Thank you, Lorraine. Yeah, I relate to that, actually. I graduated from college in 1997, and when I graduated, it was, like email was kind of just becoming a thing. I got email at my college in 1995. And so I remember reading my senior year. I still remember this, and it made quite an impact on me. In our school paper, I was at Smith, in our school paper, there was an article, and they interviewed the librarians there, and they said that this fear, they're like, everything's going to be online, we're not going to have the kind of archives, and especially at that time, I mean, we see this, like, oh, everything, it's on a floppy disk, and then it's on a smaller floppy disk, and then it's on a CD, and now it's in the cloud, I mean, and now we can't even read the old floppy disks. So there are really legitimate concerns, and so actually, I took this, I think, too much to heart, and I say this because I am in the midst, as we speak, of moving to New York City from Boston, and so last week, was packing up my apartment and getting everything in storage and whatever, and I have boxes and boxes of emails that I printed precisely for this reason. And now I realize I printed all these like completely banal things from people that I don't even talk to anymore. But I was paranoid about this question. I was like, well, the archivists need it. So yeah, it is definitely a challenge. I mean, one possibility which does not protect us in the event of nuclear apocalypse, but nonetheless may be helpful. It's a web service. I think it's called Social Safe. Maybe some of you guys know it, but it actually captures all of your posts. It sort of backs up your accounts. So I mean, we have whatever, Carbonite or iCloud or whatever for our stuff, our documents or our photos or our music, but how do you back up your social accounts? Social Safe solves that problem. But above and beyond that, even though I think people should not do it as frequently as I did, if there's something really important, print it out, because you want to have that backup. But you just have to think, if I'm moving to New York in 15 years, do I still want this? And if it meets that criterion, then do it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dorie. Let's thank our guest again.